Hello, thanks for joining me. On the edge of North Pembrokeshire, in this area of hills and river valleys, is a small chapel on the road outside Boncath. It could easily be overlooked, but hiding shyly behind the hedge, this modest building has some surprises. There's one of the smallest houses in Wales, an empty grave, and of course some stories of people who once held this place dear. Fachendre Chapel, not named after some biblical place but after the nearby farm, opened in 1882, though the date stone says 1879. Building took a while. It was a daughter chapel of Tyros Independent Chapel at Rose Hill near Kilgerran. Boncath didn't have its own chapel. The village only grew after the Cardiff Railway arrived, so people here had quite a long way to go to their chapel, until Fachendre farm went up for sale, and David Thomas, a deacon of Tyros, bought it. At first a spare barn was used as a Sunday school, then he donated this field, and the chapel was built at a cost of £320, 8 shillings and threepence. Every penny was paid for by the time of opening, all raised by the congregation, who were by no means wealthy people. Sarah, the wife of David Thomas of Fachendre, who donated the land, laid the foundation stone. When she died in July 1882, aged 72, she was buried here, though the chapel was a month away from its opening, which sadly she never saw. It was her wish that she should be interred in the chapel ground she had donated, even though some of her children were laid to rest at Tyros. At her funeral she was praised as a good, quiet, prudent and godly woman. Her husband David died in February 1898, though the headstone says March 1899. It was said at his funeral that the country had lost one of the most outstanding characters ever to walk God's earth. He was a charitable man with an excellent reputation. Along with the chapel, a stable and chapel house were built. Funds were limited, so the chapel house was tiny. It was the home of Hannah James, or Hannah Ticapel, as she was inevitably known, a poor old widow, previously a charwoman living in Clyde parish. The chapel house, though very small, gave her a secure place to live and a job. She's buried here too, just a short distance from what was once her own door. She died in 1913, aged 81, and this headstone was put up to remember her hard work and kindness in caring for this place and the people here. The epitaph was written by T. Gwenogle Evans, the then minister and a bard. Here it says was one who was a little servant to all. This headstone was given by his many friends at Tyros and Fachendre to remember David Williams, a long-widowed labourer at Fachendre farm, for his loyalty as the leader of singing at both chapels for many years. Singing was particularly noteworthy in this area, and he will have been a talented presenter. The people who attended this chapel were from in and around the village of Boncath. The railway station opened in 1886, and the village grew as a result. Jonah and Margaret Williams came here because of the railway. They were born in St Clair's, Carmarthenshire, and Jonah began his married life as a railway labourer in the 1880s, but by 1891 he had moved to Boncath and was living in one of the houses on Pentre Terrace with his growing family. He was part of the Boncath plate-laying gang responsible for keeping the railway track in good order. Jonah and Margaret had at least 10 children, not all of whom survived infancy. During their time at Boncath, they lost 3 children. On the 2nd of November, 1895, 2-year-old Mavanwi died, and 6 days later, 4-year-old Catherine followed her sister to the grave. Leaning into their headstone, as if to get closer to them, is that of Edwin, their brother, who died in 1900, aged 15. And close by is the grave of their mother Margaret, who died a few years after her son in 1903. She was 49. The village policeman was also a member of this congregation, William Morris was police constable in Boncath in the last years of the 19th and the first years of the 20th century, before being promoted to sergeant and moving to nearby Kilgerran. Whilst there, he and his wife Mary lost their eldest child, Claudia Mary, aged 20. She is buried here with her parents and sisters Rachel Lillian and Martha Rowena, who was a dressmaker in her early life. This impressive monument, with its draped urn, is to Sarah, the wife of the local butcher, Evan James. Evan nearly lost his life in a dreadful accident when he severed an artery whilst cutting meat. He would have died if it had not been for the prompt action of P.C. Morris, who we've just heard about. P.C. Morris applied a tourniquet and kept the butcher alive until the doctor arrived, and that apparently took an hour. Jane James was one of the first members of the congregation here, and one of the earlier burials. She was only 37 when she died in 1886, a year after losing both her infant twin daughters, Martha and Mary, 3 months apart. Her husband William, a farmer and miller, survived her by 20 years. David Jenkins had lived close to the chapel on the other side of the road in a cottage no longer there, and then moved to Jones Terrace, Pilot Street, St Dogmell's, and died shortly afterwards in 1908. He is remembered here with his wife Sarah, daughter Mary Ann, both buried here, and his son. His son is named on this headstone, not buried here though, because it was the only way his family could remember him. He was killed in the First World War. Private Benjamin David Jenkins enlisted in Carmarthen in 1915, first being in the Royal Army Medical Corps, but soon after being transferred to the Royal Welsh Fusiliers. He fought on the Somme and was awarded the Military Medal for Bravery in late 1916, but was killed in action on the 27th of February 1917. He was just 22. His body was lost in the infamous Somme mud, and he has no known grave. Benjamin was not a member of this chapel, as he grew up in St Dogmell's. There was only one member of Fachendre who was killed in the Great War, and he lived in Wintlan, the small farmstead just down the hill. Wintlan was the home of Jonathan and Martha Lewis, and Jonathan's parents, William and Margaret, all members of Fachendre. William died just before the war started. His wife Margaret died in December 1917. Jonathan, their son, and his wife Martha had several children. 4 of them are remembered on this stone. William Jonathan, who died in 1899, aged 5. Mary Ann, who died in 1903, aged 6. David, who died in 1919, aged 20. And Tom Richard, who was the sole member of Fachendre Chapel to be killed in the war. Not only was Tom Richard Lewis remembered on this stone, but his distraught parents, along with others from the chapel and village, paid for this monument, which looks like a grave and served as a place they could go to mourn, but is in fact not where his body lies. Private Lewis is buried in a Commonwealth War Grave cemetery on the French and Belgian border, something they could never visit. Tom Lewis enlisted in Llanelli and joined the Pembrokeshire Yeomanry, but it was disbanded and he moved to the 1st Battalion, the East Yorkshire Regiment, which fought at Ypres and Passchendaele. He was captured and died as a prisoner of war on the 27th of September 1918. 2 years later, the village and veterans marched down to this spot to unveil this monument. Essentially a village war memorial, but to only one man. The event was not as harmonious as it might have been. There were 2 speeches, one by a minister from Cardigan who said that they were not there to glorify militarism or war but to pay tribute to one who had laid down his life for them, and the other by Colonel Spence Colby of Fenona Mansion, who, perhaps taking a swipe at the anti-war sentiments of some of the local nonconformist ministers, said, "Those miserable people who went up and down the country speaking against what they were pleased to call militarism should leave the country and show themselves to be what they really are, traitors to their country." I'm not sure if this soured the event, but the memorial to Tom Richard Lewis lasted beyond the day of its unveiling, and gave his parents and the chapel something to remember the lost 27-year-old by. This monument is not unique in being an empty grave, but it is probably unique in that it contains the memorial plaque issued to his parents after his death. Known colloquially as the dead man's penny, the bronze plaques were sent to the next of kin of those who lost their lives in the Great War. They were often framed or kept in a drawer, but in the absence of a grave that could be visited, or any grave at all, they were a tangible memorial for the family to keep. Jonathan and Martha Lewis chose to embed their son's plaque in this monument. They died in the mid-20th century after seeing another world war. They're buried here with their family in the grounds of the chapel, which meant so much to them. Fachendre is a small rural chapel that is, on the face of it, quite ordinary. It's in a beautiful, if exposed, spot, hence the zinc cladding on the rear wall. It has a rusting and neglected corrugated metal hall, an outside lav, and some interesting stories, plus the tiny chapel house and a dead man's penny. I hope you thought it was worth a virtual visit. If so, please remember to hit the like button, and if you haven't already subscribed to the channel, please do so and click the little bell icon, then you'll be notified when new videos come out. And as always, thank you for watching.